Good morning. It is Sunday, October 4th, 2020. You can now relax and be informed. Here is your daily bite of news. The White House offered conflicting messages about President Trump's health on Saturday. Mark Meadows, the White House Chief of Staff, gave reporters outside Walter Reed National Military Medical Center a sober assessment off camera, calling Mr. Trump's vital signs worrisome and warning that the next 2 days would be pivotal to the outcome of his illness. Two people close to the White House said in separate interviews that the president had had trouble breathing on Friday and that his oxygen levels had dropped, prompting his doctors to give him supplemental oxygen while he was at the White House. By Saturday evening, the president released a 4-minute video meant to reassure the nation, showing him sitting at a conference table at the hospital. He acknowledged that he wasn't feeling so well earlier, but said that he felt much better now and that he expected to return to work shortly. "I think I'll be back soon, and I look forward to finishing up the campaign the way we started," he said. Referring to his decision to go to the hospital, Trump said, "I had no choice. I just didn't want to stay in the White House. I can't be locked up in a room upstairs and totally safe and just say, hey, whatever happens, happens. I can't do that. We have to confront problems." White House officials sought to project as much of a business-as-usual image as possible, insisting that the president could govern from his hospital bed and that there was no need to transfer power to Vice President Mike Pence. The president's illness forced him off the campaign trail with only a month until the election on November 3rd. Mr. Trump's events have been canceled, leaving it to Mr. Pence, who has tested negative so far for the virus, to pick up the burden. The Pentagon sought to dampen speculation that the U.S. was sending warning signals to its enemies after doomsday planes were dispatched following Donald Trump's coronavirus diagnosis. Minutes before the president tweeted that he and First Lady Melania had tested positive, 2 Boeing E-6B Mercury planes took off from both U.S. coasts. Officials were quick to dismiss speculation that the 2 planes were a show of strength and a warning to enemies not to try to take advantage of the political turmoil caused by Mr. Trump's illness. These flights were pre-planned missions. Any timing to the president's announcement is purely coincidental, said a U.S. Strategic Command STRATCOM spokesman. As Mr. Trump boarded Marine One to be airlifted to the medical center, his nuclear football was loaded alongside him. The case, officially called the Presidential Emergency Satchel, has accompanied every president when they are away from the White House. North Korean dictator Kim Jong Un offered his sympathy and support on Friday to the president and First Lady after they tested positive for coronavirus. Texas Governor Greg Abbott was sued this week over plans to restrict the number of ballot drop-off boxes in the state just weeks ahead of the election. The lawsuit was filed on Thursday by several voting rights advocacy groups, including the League of Women's Voters of Texas. The groups allege Abbott's order violates residents' constitutional right to vote and unreasonably burdens residents' ability to vote. The U.S. Supreme Court said Friday it would review a 2016 Arizona law that prohibits anyone but a family member or caregiver from returning another person's early ballot. In January, a federal appeals court ruled that Arizona's law banning so-called ballot harvesting violates the Voting Rights Act and the Constitution. The harvesting case began with Democrats suing over a law passed by Arizona Republicans that made it a felony to return someone else's ballot to election officials in most cases. Both parties had used ballot collection to boost turnout during elections by canvassing. Democrats, who found success in minority communities, said Republicans introduced the measure because of their accomplishments, while Republicans said the law was aimed at preventing election fraud. Any further action has been stayed until the Supreme Court weighs in on the matter. More than 20 hours of audio recording of the grand jury inquiry into the police killing of Breonna Taylor was released on Friday following public pressure. The recordings describe a more thorough picture of the witness interviews, 911 calls, and evidence provided to jurors over the 2 days they spent in court hearing the case and determining what actions to take against officers involved in Taylor's death. They do not, however, include any statements or recommendations from prosecutors about what charges should be brought against officers, which was expected with the recordings being released. Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron called the recordings a complete picture of events and said the jurors were told that the officers responded appropriately. Cameron said the jury deliberations and prosecutor recommendations were not recorded as they are not evidence. The recordings were released after a juror who asked to remain anonymous argued that the jury deliberations were misrepresented after Attorney General Cameron did not offer the option to indict Mattingly or Detective Miles Cosgrove for the killing of Breonna Taylor. The full story and absolute truth of how this matter was handled from beginning to end is now an issue of great public interest and has become a large part of the discussion of public trust throughout the country, the juror wrote in a motion asking for the transcripts to be released. A 17-foot great white shark weighing an astonishing 3,541 pounds was captured Friday in the Northwest Atlantic by researchers with OSearch. Researchers named the shark Ngumi. The shark is more than 50 years old. She is a very old creature, a proper queen of the ocean and a matriarch. She has all the scars, healed wounds, and discolorations that tell a deep, rich story of her life going back years, researchers said. The shark was caught off Nova Scotia, and researchers rushed to collect data for 21 research projects, including an ultrasound, bacteria samples off her teeth, fecal samples, blood, muscle, and skin samples were also taken for medical research. The shark was fitted with 3 tags, including one to record how deep she goes and another that will track her movements for the next 5 years. OSearch is currently tracking 60 white sharks tagged in the Northwest Atlantic, and data has revealed they migrate down the East Coast, around Florida, and into the Gulf of Mexico. Archaeologists found Iron Age remains in a burial site and have concluded they belong to the ancient Tagar culture, a nomadic group of warriors that lived in modern-day Siberia. 2 warriors, 1 male and 1 female, as well as an infant and an elderly woman, were part of the 4 skeletons discovered in the burial ground. The 2,500-year-old grave was packed with daggers, knives, axes, bronze mirrors, and a miniature comb made of animal horn. It's unclear what the relationship between the people was, but researchers hope to use DNA analysis to show if there were any familial ties. The archaeologists are not yet sure how they died, but they speculate perhaps an illness resulted in their deaths. Half a dozen artworks by local artists have been erected across the northern Iraqi city of Mosul since the Islamic State group lost control of it 3 years ago. My Lovely Lady, a golden-tinted statue of a woman looking out over the scarred city, was the first, erected in September 2018 in a traffic circle where IS fighters used to behead or lash residents who had broken its ultra-conservative rules. By placing this statue here, I was trying to erase these dark, terrifying images from people's minds, said Omar Ibrahim, the 35-year-old artist behind the work. My Lovely Lady represents Mosul's beauty, its rebirth after overcoming all the obstacles of this nerve-wracking period. Nerve-wracking it was. Ibrahim created the sculpture in secret in a basement studio while the IS was still controlling Mosul. When they first overran the city, the jihadists smashed works of art, musical instruments, and millennia-old artifacts, deeming them violations of their ultra-conservative views. They banned artists from working under penalty of death. It was a devastating blow for Mosul, which had been known for centuries as a hub for musicians, writers, and artists. The grueling months-long fight to recapture the city from the jihadists ravaged its infrastructure. Only 1 public hospital now functions, power and water services are intermittent, and children must walk past crumbling buildings to get to the few schools that are open. Those who have come back to Mosul can often be seen relishing quiet moments near the statues. The artworks are helping residents shake off memories of brutal punishments, even as much as the city remains in ruins. On Friday, the European Union imposed sanctions, travel bans, and asset freezes on Belarus's interior minister and the head of its electoral commission and 40 other people, but spared President Alexander Lukashenko. Despite pressure from EU's Baltic states, diplomats said Brussels was sticking to its policy of punishing power brokers as a last resort, so as to push for new elections. Belarus then announced their own retaliatory sanctions against the EU. Germany expects the European Union to impose new sanctions against Russia over the poisoning of opposition leader Alexei Navalny, Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said on Saturday. EU leaders will discuss their reaction and possible sanctions against Russia at their next summit on October 15th. I am convinced that there will no longer be any way around sanctions, Maas told news outlets. Sanctions must always be targeted and proportionate, but such a grave violation of the International Chemical Weapons Convention cannot be left unanswered. On this, we're united in Europe. The euro accounts for nearly half of sustainable capital market finances across the world, according to the World Economic Forum. The United States dollar accounts for 25% of sustainable finances, while a collection of other currencies make up the remaining 29%. The COVID-19 pandemic presented challenges, and according to WEF, pandemic-related investments will work in service of creating a climate-neutral economy by 2050. Investors are taking note as the European Green Deal investment plan, introduced in January, expects sustainable investment to be worth a minimum of €1 trillion from public and private sources to fund the region's transition to a climate-neutral status. Weeks after India and China engaged in their deadliest border clash, the sight of an American nuclear-powered aircraft carrier entering the Bay of Bengal drew attention across the region. The carrier, Nimitz, and a strike group deployed to the area, conducting an exercise with the Indian Navy, demonstrating that the United States and India have taken their anger against Beijing and forged stronger diplomatic and military ties. But social justice advocates worry that the Trump administration is turning a blind eye to India's rights abuses against Muslims under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, prioritizing military and geopolitical alliances over all else. Mr. Modi, a Hindu nationalist, has been criticized heavily for actions that have disenfranchised Muslims in India. Late last year, Mr. Modi introduced a law that laid out a path to citizenship for people from 6 religious minorities who arrived to India, but Muslims were excluded. The action prompted mass protests across India and resulted in a brutal police crackdown. The United States and India have been increasingly soured on China. Of most interest, experts say, is whether the border dispute will move India closer into a regional partnership with the United States, Japan, and Australia, known as the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or Quad. Over the years, India has accelerated its weapons purchases from the United States. It is slated to buy upward of $20 billion in American arms by the end of 2020. India has sought to fast-track a purchase of 30 MQ-9B Sky Guardian drones from General Atomics in a deal that is likely to exceed $3 billion, according to industry officials. The drones could be deployed to India's disputed border region with China and significantly expand its surveillance over the area. October 15th is the deadline that Prime Minister Boris Johnson has set for getting a deal announced on Brexit. So far, despite a 9th round of negotiations this week, there are few signs of a trade deal on the horizon, which raises the alternative of a no-deal situation. If there is a trade deal, the likely focus is going to be on removing tariffs. Both sides have said that in principle, they want to see tariff-free and quota-free trade between the two. That is likely to be the big element of any deal, but the UK will no longer have anything like the relationship with the EU single market and customs union that they've had since they became an EU member. Well, that's it for today's news. If you'd like to read more on these topics, please see our description below for sources. Subscribe to receive a daily news update. Thank you for listening. Be relaxed, be informed, be connected.